Hello and welcome back to the Sci-Fi Junkie. This is episode 4 of our review of the Amazon Prime series Picard. This episode for me is the first one where I can have a small episode over the actual plot of the episode. So if you go back to episode 3, we seem to get a lot of ends tying up, introduced to key cast members, the building of the new fledgling crew, culminating with them jumping onto the new starship and heading off in search of the scientists who would lead them to Daj. What happens next is we have a very brief interlude on the ship where we get a little bit more characterization, so we find a little bit more detail about our major characters, we get insight into some of their inner states of mind, and again I'm going to try to avoid spoilers as much as I can. So I have no issue with that at all, that's great. They're in the starship, we're cutting backwards forward between the story of the Daj's sister on the Romulan cube, or the Borg cube, which is being controlled by the Romulans. We get some more insight into the brother and sister relationship, so is he really going to sell Daj out, or is there potential that he's actually going to fall in love with that version of Daj? I really should learn her name because she obviously has her own name. I'll try and get that right for the next video. And so that's all really good, so that's kicking on quite nicely. We can kind of see where they're going. Find the scientist, and then from finding the scientist, jump back onto the ship, and then off you go towards the Borg cube. And so we can see this story arc building quite nicely. But it's then adds this flashback back to a younger Picard, and also building up the narrative of the failed evacuation of the Romulans. Introduced to a particular grouping of Romulan warrior women nuns, which I quite like, and they have a particular approach to always telling the truth and being completely open, and that's a nice contrast to the traditional Romulan reserve. So those are kind of like good points. And then we jump back and we are then revealed that actually what Picard wants to do is wants to divert from his mission. He wants to go back to there because... And that's a problem. I don't really see there's a clear narrative reason why he wants to return. There's a thinly veiled notion that he wants to get a buy-in from one of these warrior nuns. Okay, but that's a single individual he's going up against. He doesn't know what. In reality, why is this piece of the story arc necessary? It's because in the flashback sequence we get the fact that there's a young Romulan male who's been taken in, adopted or surrogated by the warrior nuns, and he's going to become the next member of the crew. He's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a Spock Romulan samurai hybrid character. So I don't mind what we find about the character so far. It's quite interesting. There's a very untypical beheading for a Star Trek episode which is carried out by that particular character. Sorry, that was a bit of a spoiler, but hey ho, I'm going to try and keep it to a minimum. So I like where the character's going in a general sense, but it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of why we divert from the journey. It's almost like, yeah, we've got a really neat way of building our original cast and crew, but what we don't have is we don't have the other aspect which we want to do of the young warrior. How can we shoehorn this in? So rather than, I would prefer to see a separate story arc where this character actually decides to leave the world he was stranded and actually, hitchhikes a lift, steals a spaceship, whatever it may well be, and ends at the same destination as Picard and his crew, and they could have met there. And for me, that would have made more sense. It's kind of like Picard's on a mission, he's got his destination, he knows exactly where he wants to go, he's got to find this scientist so he can understand how this potential connection to the essence of data can be fully explored, and he's got that real drive, and we get that, and we get the sense of his anger at himself and his frustration because he's unable to protect Daj. So that all makes perfect sense, and all of a sudden he takes his 90-degree metaphorical turn and shoots off to another planet to have a conversation and then pick up. Now, I do appreciate that when he's on that planet, what we do get is we get some further backstory. So we get a little bit of infill, so we find out a little bit more about the events following the Romulan Nova. We get some more insight into potentially what's going down on Mars. And so I can see the intrigue is building. And that's fine. But the question which I have is whether or not it was the best narrative choice there. Now, this could be an inherent fault with two things. Firstly, of Star Trek itself as a storytelling vehicle, but also potentially of the format which we're used to within that kind of streaming environment. So the one thing which I love about Picard is the fact it is one of those Prime shows where you get one episode per week. So we have to watch it once per week, as we follow that storyline through. Now, for people of my generation, that is the way we consumed most of our television back through the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. Actually, even to the low 2000s, to be perfectly honest. Now, what that does mean is that we've got this situation where now, in contrast, if the show's available, we can switch on our computers, switch on your smartphones, and you can watch an entire season in an evening. And there are times when I really enjoyed like binge watching 4 or 5 episodes of an evening. I'm watching The Magicians at the moment, and I'm definitely watching 2 or 3 episodes of that per night because I've just discovered it, and I know that they're either about to launch or they've launched already season 5. So it's like I could got some catching up there. So binge watching has its purpose. However, what we've got now is we've got a change to the way that we're going to traditionally tell stories. It's less important for a story to resolve in one episode because we can expect the audience to rapidly move on to the next. So that is positive because it encourages us to make bolder story arcs. And I think the downside with that is it inevitably means that we end up with episodes like this particular episode where it really doesn't seem to achieve much. It doesn't seem to drive the story arc, and it can be seen as quite a passive episode, quite a slow episode. So I think in terms of the enjoyment of the show, it will eventually add in enjoyment to that show, but in terms of when I watched it, it reminded me, if I'm honest, it reminded me of like my feelings around the next gen movie Star Trek Insurrection, which was, I love that film. I had no issues at all with that film, but I acknowledged that actually, rather than it being a cinema film, it was kind of an extended 2-part episode. So yes, I think that there's some problem with plotting. I think that the pace has dropped off a little bit this way, and I think that's inevitable because of the storytelling format we're in. So, funnily enough, last episode I mentioned the fact that my only concern was could they sustain the momentum and deliver the end results of this story arc that I expected. Now, rather than being kind of like, oh, I'm not so sure now because this episode's dropped the ball a little bit, actually it makes me quite hopeful because it does mean that what they're looking to do is actually to build this story. They're not looking to rush it. They're not worrying about, getting fans on every single episode to go, hey, that ticked all the nostalgia buttons, it's classic Trek, it's got new insights or whatever. So I think that for me is encouraging because it doesn't look like they're just doing purely fan service. So I'm going to stick with my initial instinct that I don't believe Patrick Stewart would have put his name to a product or been involved with the resurrection of the character of Picard unless the quality of storytelling was there. So that's what we're relying on now. If the quality of storytelling is as good as it's been historically, then I think we're still going to have a fantastic show. But I have to say that in terms of actually enjoyment of the episodes, this was a completely enjoyable, watchable episode. But it works because it's episode 4. If this had been episode 1, 2 or 3, then I think straight away it would have been, oh my god, this show's going off the boil far too quickly. So fingers crossed that as we go on to the end of this week and we get episode 5 launched, that this is going to kick us forward again. They're underway, they're on Starship, so I'm hoping that means they're going to arrive at a new and exciting destination, and we're going to catch up with Maddox, and actually, I don't think we'll get some answers, but I still think we're going to get some interesting interaction. And then, although I don't know for sure, I'm presuming that potentially he will be the last member of the crew, or if he's not met the last member of the crew, perhaps they're going to meet him, then there's going to be some form of accident, and we're going to end up with our first interesting protagonist death. So actually, if Maddox was actually, to be introduced but then be killed off, but he leaves a hook or a cliffhanger which the crew could then explore, again, I'm up for anything at this stage. Central performances, like I said, are still rock solid. There's not a character I don't believe in. If I'm disappointed at all, it would be possibly that the 2 Romulan characters who are basically functioning as Picard's housekeepers. They also have got an interesting background within Romulan military, or at least maybe even one of their secret services. And it's like, okay, well, I quite like those characters, so we got to know them a little bit, and they're kind of like jettisoned. So I'm not expecting that we're going to see them again much in season 1. So it's very interesting to see how this go, and I think it needs to build, because I think if it doesn't keep building now, if it doesn't start driving on, then what happens if we have 2 or 3 of these episodes with a little bit more laid back in their pace, then that allows you to concentrate too much on the plot. And then with any science fiction show, if you dwell too long on the details of the plot, very often what you're able to do is pick bus-sized holes in it, and that'd be a great shame. So fingers crossed that the plotting has been done really well by the team of writers, and we get this now ramping up towards the end of the season. Really enjoying it still so far. Looking forward to this week's episode. I'm sure I'll be watching it multiple times, and what I'm really quite looking forward to is I'm looking forward to getting the entire season done, so what I can then do is kind of a retrospective and give a lot more detail, because I'm deliberately trying to be as detail light as possible, because I don't want anybody to have that experience ruined, because I imagine there are some people out there who have decided that they're not even going to watch Picard until they can watch it all in one go. So their plan is to wait for the release schedule and then binge watch it. I know that's a strategy which probably some people will be following, and that's fair enough. It's not a strategy that I could do for a Star Trek property. I'm too much of a fan, but I can understand why that may be interested. So once again, thank you for your time. I've been reviewing the content of the video. I've got some ideas of how I can improve the quality. Hopefully the audio is slightly better on this one. A bit louder for you there. So I think it was a bit thin last time. And I was going to play with the structure. But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to very much plan the structural changes for the next video series I do. So I'll stick with this current format for Star Trek Picard, and then when I move on to another program, I'm going to just try and mix it up again and just try something a little bit different in terms of the video production. I may talk a bit more about that on a separate video, so if you do enjoy watching it again, don't forget to like and subscribe and click the notification bell so that I'm able to let you know as soon as the video's gone up. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon.